Yeah.
Okay, we should stop. Wait a second. Oh, hello. Welcome to Data and Bots. My name's Camille, and I was at Boise State University studying mechanical engineering.
And I'm Olivia, and I'm studying computer science at UC Davis.
Cool. We started this podcast because we really wanted to do some more talks about diversity and inclusion and kind of our perspectives and our lens. And how did we meet, Olivia?
Yeah, so we met this summer at the Women in Color breakfast. Where was it? I think it was at ThoughtWorks.
Yeah,
it was at ThoughtWorks. And there's actually one happening December 1st, right?
Yes.
Another.
So if we post this in time, y'all should definitely RSVP because it's an amazing event.
Yeah. And we wanted to share our perspective and our experience because we noticed that there was only one other platform, shout out to the three unicorns, right? Giving experiences of Black women in tech. And there's just so many more experiences that we felt weren't being talked about. And so who better to do it than us?
Yeah. So as your first episode, we wanted to do a conversation about inclusion in practice.
So on our podcast, we wanted to make sure that we center our conversation around our real lives, how we know people from different cultural backgrounds, from different ethnicities, people who are in tech, people who are not in tech. And we want to make sure our conversations and the reality, right, that tech it's invading every industry, but not every single person is interacting with tech the same way that we are. And we want to include those people in our conversations as well.
So who are we interviewing today?
So today we interviewed Amina Yamusa, and she is a really great startup founder. Her company, they're part of Echo and Green, and she is working to help Black millennials better stay connected and expand their network and have access to opportunities that we've been excluded from. So it's almost like a platform that would help millennials even understand what it takes to go from seeing a job posting to actually getting that job and all of the steps in between there. And we had a conversation with Amina about education.
Yeah, and I really like this conversation because we all happen to go to PWIs, which stands for predominantly white institutions, and we just had a discussion about what it takes to get in the door, and it's just not just about having the credentials and going to the right school, because when you get out, it's a system that still excludes us all. So we'll dive into that, but favorite talking about our shared experiences at these institutions for higher learning and education, and how they're really similar in the way that they made us feel. And it was a really good moment to kind of collectively take a sigh and kind of understand that together. And if you're looking for further conversation about those ideas around being in a system that still excludes you, even though you have the credentials, there's a brand new TED Talk that I just want to give a shout out to by Crystal Martin, and it's called No Hard Work Does Not Speak for Itself. So definitely check that out if you have the time. Really cool TEDx talk. Should we hop right into the conversation?
Yeah, let's get started.
Alrighty, let's get started.
All right, welcome to Data Bots. So here we have, I'm Olivia.
I'm Camille.
Hi, I'm Amina.
And today we've decided to talk about education, just because we all have a really, really different story. Camille, do you want to start us out with an introduction to school for you?
Yeah, so I come from a place called Idaho, and I went to Boise State University, and my school is PWI, a predominantly white institution. What's a little bit different about my school is that being in Idaho, it's a very isolated area. So probably what's not very different is we have a very small Black population, about 300 students to 22,000 students. And one of the things that it's very apparent when you get on our campus is that there's not a very strong community of Black students, and there's not also a strong recognition of Black student excellence. So when I got onto campus, I didn't notice it at first because I had grown up in Boise. So for me, it was a very seamless introduction to the area, and I kind of got my groove, got into classes, and that was great. But then a couple of things started happening. I realized that the students who were coming to my school, who were mostly, so the Black students who were coming to my school were mostly from California, and they had a very hard time acclimating. And they described all these instances of like culture shock and things that I didn't really actually experience because I had grown up in Idaho. And it was from there where I realized that there was a bond that we could have of, trying to make it together. And then as things started to pop up where we would experience like a hate crime, or we would experience some type of microaggression that really brought us low, we would kind of come together. But what became apparent, and one of the reasons why I'm not there anymore, is that kind of took over my experience. Like more and more, it took over my experience from it being like a purely academic experience where I'm learning to like, oh my gosh, what happened today? What do we got to go fight? What white nationalist group is popping up that we need to go protest? And I decided that wasn't what I wanted from my academic experience. So that's kind of where I come from.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Nina?
Yes, so I think, Camille, my experience is probably pretty similar to yours, even though we definitely had more Black people when it came to proportions. I think we had 400 for 5,000, which I think is actually pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I went to Princeton and I grew up in Jersey my entire life, so I think I had somewhat of a similar situation to you in that nothing I experienced was particularly new. I just think that by the time I got to college, I was tired of the bullshit, maybe. So things or experiences that I had never internalized, say, in high school, especially like when you're home, right? Like you have your family, your family's Black. You know what I'm saying? You have your friends from home, like they're Black. Like you don't, you're not inundated with certain things all day, every day. Like you're not living with people who kind of perpetuate these bizarre, systems. Going to school kind of took things up a notch. And yeah, the Black Princeton community is funny. I say we all weren't friends. I definitely think we all were family though. And that there's a lot of people who at the time I did not like, even now maybe still might not like, but there's a sense of community and like, okay, if you ever need something, I'll put you on, and vice versa. Yeah, and I think, Olivia, we were talking about this a bit. I think, I'm pretty transparent about my experience in Princeton, not liking it literally at all. And I think a lot of it just had to do with, feeling like I was always expected to work so much harder for so much less, which I think is kind of like hashtag being a Black woman, right? But like I just felt like constantly there's this like fake meritocracy that I was having to play into to prove that I wasn't a quote unquote affirmative action kid, which I didn't give a fuck about. Like I don't care if you think I deserve to be here or not. I'm gonna do what I have to do, right? But yeah, constantly walking around with that bizarre stigma that is based in like literally zero fact, right? Because you're also around people who literally are the children of billionaires, right? Who are legacy, not just their dad and their mom, right? Like their great grandpa, are Princeton alums. It was just like a very bizarre world. Like honestly, I felt like the Twilight Zone was like, it's like what's that James Baldwin quote? To be Black and conscious is, to be insane at some point. That's how I constantly felt there, like just borderline crazy. So it was a very interesting experience.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so Olivia again, and I grew up in Berkeley, California, and like that experience is pretty diverse. And I went to like Berkeley High, also pretty diverse. And so in college, I went to UC Davis, and not so diverse at all. Like, I guess for me, hearing other people's experiences from other parts of the country is like super interesting. But one thing I started to notice is that there's this like almost false sense of diversity. Like going to Berkeley High felt like, wow, it's like this multicultural place and everyone has this equal access. But when you actually start to look at the stats and where people end up going, not so much. Like they have like a big school and all these small schools, and you start to understand like, higher income students who are mostly either white or Asian go to like a small school where they could travel abroad. And then you see all these like Black and Latino students going to CPA, which is sort of known as like the Colored People's Academy. And then you have like everyone in the middle going to academic choice, like that's where I went. And they kind of like forge their own path, but there's like a tracking system. So if you're tracked into a higher track or lower track, that's going to segment like where you end up being able to go to college. And so just after getting, on the UCD campus, there's not many Black students at all. I think we might have less Black students than both of you guys, and we're supposed to be like a public university. And specifically being in the computer science department, it's usually like one Black person in the building. and there's a very large population of international students there. So that's really cool, like hearing about an international perspective, but it's not an international perspective of students of color. Like it's like international from East Asia or, Japanese or Chinese students, some from Europe, but not, I don't really see too many from Africa or even Latin America. So it's pretty not of color. One positive thing though is UC Davis is becoming a primarily Hispanic university, so that means that they're going to try to have an enrollment above 25%, and that's for the students and for the instructors and researchers on the campus. So I think it might be one of the first primarily Hispanic universities in the country. So that's pretty interesting. So what are you guys studying in school, or what did you study?
I'm studying mechanical engineering, and one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because I love engineering, but I like things that move. So engineering department at Boise State wasn't super diverse, and we really struggled with even getting National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, instilled. There was a lot of barriers. One wasn't just like recruitment, because obviously when you have a really small population, let's say like maybe there are 30 Black students in the engineering department, your target demographic is super low and super hard to recruit for, so that you can like provide that type of community for engineering students. The other part is the engineering campus was like one of the furthest reaches of our campus. So it wasn't like we were centralized and able to like, it's not like the rest of the campus is a very far walk away, but it definitely was an isolation without isolation kind of a thing, where you were kind of physically apart from everyone else. And so even other STEM students, maybe like in science or math, were kind of all the way across the campus from you. And then the other barriers we kind of faced with trying to create our own community within engineering college was like process. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Like when you're doing a club, when we were trying to raise money, even like when we would get like grants or things like that, money was a funny business. They're like, why do you have this money? What are you trying to do with it? And they'd make us answer all these questions and go through all these hoops just to like go to a conference, for example. Like the barrier to get to conferences was something that I had to plan for and like mentally prepare for. Like, I'm going to advocate not only just to companies to sponsor us, but to my school to let us go to these conferences. And I had to sometimes really press hard to make sure that we got through all the red tape. And there's just like too much red tape, I feel, for our community to kind of get started, and it was unnecessary, and it could stop a lot of people from having that community. And that's like a really sad, like still truth that exists, I think, at Boise State for even something as simple as NSBE.
Yeah, no, I'm impressed to hear y'all talk about navigating to go to conferences, everything, navigating the red tape, because when I tell you, it wasn't even on my mind frame to like get beyond campus or to use Princeton resources to actually propel my career. Like, I had none of that consciousness when I was on campus. For me, it was really more of like, God, how am I going to get to this graduation day? It was like a constant battle. Like, okay, just like have to find a way to be okay enough with this culture to like just finish this, right? And yeah, so my friends laugh at me because they say like I literally dabbled in everything. Like, I took a class in probably damn near every department that wasn't a language department. Like everything from American religious history of woman to like environmental economics to like, yeah, just like all over liberation economics of Van Jones, actually, right? Like just classes all over the mix. But technically, I graduated as a politics major and my environmental studies minor. I was one class away from being African American studies. My junior year, I decided to be crazy and attempted to switch to civil environmental engineering. That was wild. I would have had to stay longer in order to actually be accredited. Grades were tough. I hadn't done hardcore math for a good 2 years, right? And I'm in classes with people who literally had taken like 2 times and like we're just here to get their A, because people knew how to work that system, right? And I just had no finesse in college. That's like really, when I look back at like my biggest challenge, I just did not know how to navigate.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, like working the system and people coming in already taking the classes?
Yeah, it's like people will come in knowing exactly what they had to do, what they had to take to advance, especially in your more competitive majors, like your math, your physics majors. You tell people like really came in with an understanding. Okay, I took AP physics, C, the calculus one in school. I can move up, but now I'm going to take it again here so that like I can protect my GPA as I go up into the more difficult physics courses. And right before, up until I think 2 years after I graduated, Princeton had grade deflation, right? So 35% of A's were reserved for only 35% of people taking a class in the department could get an A. And departments would primarily save their A's for their majors, right? So like when you came into an entry level class, it was like straight up like you're gonna get weeded out. Like it was straight up competitive. And so, yeah, it was like a very, like, I laugh when I hear about like an MIT system where it's you don't get a grade like your entire freshman year or something in STEM classes. I think it's something like that to like help you like ease in and like help people persist and to handle the diversity. I'm like, no, like, Princeton was like a full on, like, everyone on their own. And that like fed into the story I was telling you about that environmental economics class I was in. Yeah, we're like literally I was the only black woman. I was the only woman of color, right, in this class. And I found out like literally through one of my white male kind of sort of friends, right, everyone had created a study group together without me. And it turned out like I actually got the best grade on the midterm and the final, right? But like I don't think they could wrap their head around the fact that like I could be a contribution to what they were doing.
Even that you got a better grade than all.
Yeah,
like they pooled their resources.
Yeah. I don't think they understood it, right? Yeah, it was just bizarre space. Undergrad, you could not pay me to do it over.
I think talking about finesse is like that's really important. Like especially when you're isolated and you don't have that support group, you gotta be able to do things like maybe I should audit this class first because I know it's gonna be struggle, or I need to switch it up. Like maybe I need to go find somewhere else to study and find some off-campus tutor or something like that. And there are just options that you have to like create for yourself, and not everyone. Like you have to like figure out that the traditional model and what everybody else is doing is not going to work for you, but no one else has a blueprint for you at the same time. I think that's something really important for students who feel isolated and like they're failing, but they don't know where they're going.
So true. And relationship building is something I never understood, right? Until maybe like my junior year, I would say. It's like, yes, grades are theoretically arbitrary, right? But like when people like you, like it's amazing how things will manifest in your favor. I'll never forget, like political stats ended up being my favorite class, probably all of undergrad, and like that's what all my independent work in school was. And I remember it's because I had this one professor close to EMA, and like literally I'd go into his office, and this is like the only class I'd ever done this in. I would go into his office and start my problem sets with him there to like answer all my questions as I was starting out, and no one else would do it, right? So times would come out, and I'm like, oh, like this isn't easy, but he just answered all my questions and helped me like move through this so like I could navigate it. And even points where like it was by far not my best class, right? But other points where I'm like, I wonder if Professor Ema kind of like looked out for me a little bit, like on this problem set, right? Because he knew how much like effort I put into it. So things like that, like it took me so long to figure out, like, wow, that could actually help.
I think in that way, grades aren't arbitrary, right? Because they can say where they're going to draw the line, whether or not you get the C, the B, or the A. And so I definitely think relationships have a really good outcome if you can create those.
Yeah.
I really like what you were saying, Camille, about finding ways to like navigate this space and even on like non-traditional paths, because that's definitely what I did. Like I started as a chemistry major, and then through this like research internship I found out like healthcare, they don't care about technology, and they will have you doing grunt work like all day in paper and pencil when there should be software to do it. And so when I switched into computer science, like I felt like I had a teacher who was like a researcher, and he cared about research, like, and he was just not a good instructor. So for me, it was like a really, really difficult transition. And like knowing what I know now, like it didn't have to be. Like I went to YouTube to figure out like to supplement my classes. Like literally, I did Harvard CS50 with like David Mallon, who's a great instructor, and I was like, wait a minute, I could just like go online and take the MIT courses or go on Coursera and learn this material. Like I don't have to deal with my like horrible instructor on campus. Cool, well then that's what I'm gonna do. And like for me, I've been like supplementing my education ever since. And people ask me all the time, like, oh, you know, how did you learn this thing? How did you get into this? There's no class on that. It's like not at our campus, but the internet has a class, right? Like,
yeah, MOOCs are a game changer. I don't think MOOCs really popped until my senior year. When was Coursera founded?
Ooh, I don't know.
I can't remember.
I feel like it was a while, like people weren't using it, but it was available for a while.
Yeah, I feel like it's around
like
08. Yeah. Like I feel like it was there, but it wasn't something that was on my radar until right when I was about to leave school. And it's funny, that's like what you said, that's how my whole transition into dev work has all come around. Just teaching myself shit, right?
With the power of Google, it was founded in 2012, it looks like.
Okay. So I graduated in 2013, so it really was my senior year. It was the first year. Wow.
Yeah.
It was a game changer.
Complete game changer.
Right?
Seriously, yeah. I mean, okay, so there are some other topics that I wanted to tackle here. Like, how do you guys feel about, like, class? Like, social class in terms of college. And not just in, like, you know, it sounds like we all attended primarily white institutions, but what about even, I find that class is a big topic even amongst the Black community on campus, right? And I think it's a big problem, and I feel like it's one reason that it's really hard for our community to like advance.
Yeah, I think at Princeton there were things were pretty stratified in that. There was this joke that like the quote unquote prep school Black kids were up campus. So there was like the up campus Black folk and the down campus Black folk. There were also like the Black folk who went to FSI, which was our Freshman Scholars Institute, which was basically you got to come to campus, do coursework before everyone else came to campus, and the people who hadn't, right? And I think there were certain things that ended up kind of bridging those gaps, but coming in, right? Like I think even just like my friendships, I was up campus Black folk. Like those were all my friends were. Like we didn't walk down campus because we were lazy a lot, right? But that's where like all the pop and stuff was happening. So yeah, like there were interesting class divisions happening on campus. I think honestly the only thing that helped that with my experience was the fact that my sorority Delta like ended up bringing together like Black girls from all of those different pockets. So that's kind of how we ended up becoming more unified when it comes to my class here. Yeah, but I think class is a huge challenge in any community. And I think especially looking even at, I think of it from the perspective of like the impact of Black Princeton alums a lot, right? Like what are we doing to really upend structures that really disadvantage us across the board? We're like really at the bottom, right? And how do we not just talk about like that time we weren't let into the country club, you know what I'm saying? Or the time like our son was going to this predominantly white like camp and like got called a nigger, right? Like how are we actually talking about the ways in which like race prevents large numbers of Black people from drinking clean water, from breathing clean air. Like,
yes,
it's like sometimes I feel like the Black elite, especially in the more academic world, right, only care about instances of racism that still affect them, which might be like police brutality, right? But everything else, like, there's no uproar over, and that upsets me. But yeah, I don't know. This is like a tangent. I can go on.
Do you have any comments?
One of the ways that in the Black community, I'm going to stick with that theme that I faced class at my school was we had a different population. We had the African American students, but then we had the African students or refugee students even. And Boise, Idaho itself is a refugee relocation site. So when people come in and they're being, refugees come in and they're being selected like where you're going to go, Boise is one of those places that they go. And so as our refugee and African population was growing, we noticed that there was a little bit of a discord between African American students and African students. And there's this thing about being called Black. Like, some African students don't want to be called Black or considered, Black, or African American, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the other way around. they were like, don't call us African American, we are African. That was the distinction. And so in one of our student groups, like Black Student Union, or it was called Afro Black in our school, we brought that name so that we could help bring in unity and kind of help speak to that kind of discord that we were seeing, where we were walking past each other and not speaking to each other. We didn't know who each other were. And even like that name change, which might sound very small, it seemed to actually work and bring in more people together, that we were having conversations with each other, getting to know each other. Because with having too little information about each other and without having similar lived experiences, we just kind of almost fell apart. And I think that was really important for our school, because it's such a small Black population in general. And that was a big year. I think that was my sophomore year when that came about. And it prepared us for what was going to come, because we had no idea what was going to come in the next couple of years. And we needed that unity.
Wow. Yeah, I would say for myself, I would say I saw it more. I've seen it a little bit more as I've moved through, I guess, software engineering, how there's some people who kind of already have a lot of privilege, right? Like, they've already known about the tech space. They've known about all this cool stuff that's happening. And then they pick certain people to be their mentees. They're like, I see this other shining, Black young person, and let me go mentor them. And there's other people who show interest and maybe go to events, but they're like, nah, not this person. And I feel like for me, as an individual, a lot of the allyship that I've found has been, unfortunately, not in the Black community. Because I feel like there were people who saw me when I first started to get into the, tech community, and they were like, I don't think she's going to do anything or something. So they didn't help me, right? But it wasn't like I was just going to stop and be like, darn, no Black people help me, so I'll never advance. It's like I had to find allyship elsewhere. And one of just that sort of theme, I guess, has followed me for a while, because even in high school, there were certain people who were part of communities like Jack and Jill or other upper class or upper middle class Black communities. And, I was not invited to those type of events. I wasn't a part of that community. I was a part of an art community, and I sort of stayed there. But I think that by keeping that segmentation, it's really hurtful to our community as a whole, just because we're so underrepresented across the board, and there's so scarce resources that to try to say, that talented 10th mentality, and to keep that going, we have a select group of people who are going to, receive education and receive the fruits of society, and literally to say everyone else is not going to get it. I mean, we see the amount of resources that we have right now, and it's not a lot.
Yeah.
So how do we move past that?
Yeah, no, I think it's what you're saying points to the fact that we're at a really critical moment, I think, with Black tech, and that we have to figure out, right, if we're going to keep moving forward with more of that talented 10th mentality, or if we're actually going to, disrupt some of these really exploitative systems? Or are we going to essentially just create a Black Silicon Valley? Like, is that the goal? Or do we just want to assimilate into that? Or are we actually going to build something unique that has value systems, a culture that we can actually, I think, be proud of? And look, I'm all for it. I think there's, a potential to play the game to change the game. I totally get people who go in, get resources, bring them back out. Like, I completely respect that role. But I think if we are going to do that, we have to be heavily strategic and coordinated. And I think that is something that's sometimes lost in the diversity in tech conversation, right? Quite frankly, like, that's part of my work with